Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Bo Talifer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 24, Deliberate Practice.
All right, Eric, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects today, deliberate practice, specifically from S2e24-Ericsson's work, and he was he was a Swedish psychologist working in the States. I think he passed away a few years ago, but his work on the field of what makes experts tick is bar none quality, top quality. So one of his biggest contributions to this field was the concept of deliberate practice. And contrary to popular belief, this does not mean practicing deliberately. So it's pretty easy to hear that term, deliberate practice, and think, okay, that just means while I'm practicing whatever I'm trying to get better at, I just got to really focus and all that stuff. And that is part of it, but he means something much more specific than just, setting goals and that kind of stuff. So if you compare this, a lot of people think practice is kind of just putting in reps, putting in time. And, you have this phenomenon of, I think about it as newbie gains. So when you're new at something, literally just showing up is enough to make you better, because everything you do when you're new at something is enough to make you grow. It's like, the first time you go to the gym, pretty much any heavy weight you lift is going to cause some kind of positive stimulus. So we have a similar thing with music where, if you just show up and start learning something, it's going to be good. But you'll plateau in a very short period of time with that kind of training philosophy. And so Ericsson uses this idea of deliberate practice, where a field like music is literally the textbook example. Music has existed for, a long time, especially instrumental training regimes like violin pedagogy has been evolving for hundreds and hundreds of years. Same with piano, and keyboard pedagogy, and even guitar pedagogy is pretty old. So if you want to rise to the top of these instrumental fields, you essentially at some point will need to use a training philosophy that comes from a teacher who's experienced at training people. And that's really the difference between deliberate practice and just practicing purposely or practicing with wise trial and error, is that when there's a tradition that has a validated training regime, like the Suzuki method for violin, or what we do with MLT, it'll get you to higher levels of ability faster than just generally doing trial and error on your own. And so I just want to throw out all that as the basic, the basis for the conversation to start riffing off of.
Yeah, for sure. If you just get out your horn and start practicing and you haven't been practicing for a while, you're going to improve quite a bit initially. And then, but then if you just keep doing what you've always been doing, you might not get better at practicing. So there's better practice, and there's also getting better at practicing. I don't know if you hear the distinction between the two a little bit or not. But it's like, how do you practice? And then what's the practice of practicing? So taking each component of what you need in terms of, tone quality, articulations, audiation, of course, probably the primary thing. But you got to also put in the time on these things. And if you do that on your own, you're not going to benefit near as much as if you have a coach. I mean, the greatest athletes in the world, right? The fastest guy in the world still has a coach to look at, Usain Bolt, right? He's the fastest guy, or was, he's still not. And he needs somebody to tell him, to fix that, or mindset, or could be a number of things but a coach will help him achieve his result better than if he didn't have a coach, right? And then there's an in-between
which is
zone.
Fascinating. Yeah, and I just want to bring out something in this that you're saying about having a coach. For a novice, the coach literally has knowledge, like, hey, you should do it like this because it'll shave off a lot of learning time if you just cut to the chase. I can show you what matters, basically. But then even at an expert performer level, you're talking Usain Bolt, like the guy's faster than any coach that's going to coach him. The coach is still useful because the coach provides a feedback mechanism for the athlete or the musician in this case to train with. And you'll see that. You'll see musicians training with teachers that the musicians themselves have outperformed. I mean, I don't know, Anna Vidovic's teacher at Peabody, I mean, she was probably outperforming him, when she was there. But it's still valuable to have the coach because, deliberate practice, for one, can be a very isolating activity. But just because someone's not at the exact skill level that you are at doesn't mean they don't have the ability to actually help train you and push you further in that direction. So the coach can really provide two separate benefits, depending on where someone is.
And so that's one distinction in Ericsson's, right? There's 3 levels. It's like, right? Aren't there like 3? One's get yourself a coach. One is you're flailing around by yourself, and in between there's.
Yeah, so the in-between, so let's just recap those levels just so everyone's with us. So naive practice is when basically you have no plan. You're like, hey, I need to practice. And that's about how detailed your practice plan is. Sometimes it works well, especially for new people. It does not work for getting at the highest levels of, whatever the sport or deliberate practice is, again, where you have a coach or a teacher who has a training philosophy that has worked with other students. They have a tried and true method and they put you through it. Now, there's this weird in-between area where what if you're doing something that no one has ever done before? What if you're Coltrane playing giant steps when no one else has ever played over those kinds of chord progressions?
There's no coach to be found.
There's no coach to be found, and there's no method of, okay, you have to play these licks this many times in these keys. There's no method. So even in this case, though, this is different than naive practice because you can make calculated guesses. You can say, hey, I'm pretty good at my instrument and no one's ever done this type of, harmonic progression, but I know what works for learning all these other harmonic progressions. I know how to learn how to audiate stuff. So I can theorize that if I do this, it'll probably work. Now, that is just really close to deliberate practice when it gets at that level, but it technically is not. Deliberate practice is when there is a tried and true method that you're essentially following.
Yeah, and the coach could, or hopefully is part of that too. But one or the other or both. Well, you've got some guidance because the fish doesn't understand water because you can't take him out of the water to show him what it is that he has to understand.
Yeah, and that's such a great analogy for what Ericsson talked about. Ericsson said that expert performers had enhanced mental representations. So this is one of these loaded terms where what makes the master chess player? They can literally play chess blindfolded without even having specifically trained it because they're essentially playing chess like very efficiently in their mind. They have the representations. What's a mental representation for a musician? It's bad terminology. Representation sounds like a visual thing. Audiated patterns are mental representations. In Eric's lingo, we have to do some translating, but that's essentially what he's saying. What makes expert performers is the types of the content memory of the domain. So what's the content memory of music? It's tonal patterns. It's rhythm patterns. It's being able to audiate harmonic progressions, being able to audiate everything. And so the benefit of a coach when you're a novice is they can say, look, this is the mental representation at your level you need to learn. Forget about all this other stuff. Forget about scales. Forget about all this other stuff. You need to learn to sing tonal patterns. Boom. And then that's really what shaves the time from purposeful practice to deliberate practice. Because with purposeful practice, you might kind of know what the representations are that you're trying to get and what you need to do in practice to get them. But if someone's been where you're trying to go, they can say, no, you're thinking 10 things are important when really 2 things are important, and this is what you should be doing. And Gordon's such a great example of that, with the tonal patterns and rhythm patterns. It just cuts to the chase.
Yeah, it distills down the fundamental aspects of what is going to make you musical, which is, audiation. And it's not to discount the technical issues that you'll need to, to conquer as well in order to make your audiation come alive, and your breathing or whatever else goes into performing well. Beyond that, but in terms of what we're talking about here, this deliberate practice would really matter. If you're trying to get to that next level, it's really kind of simple in a way, but I don't know that it's always conscious for people. I know it's not always conscious the first week that I'm practicing my trumpet to get myself in shape for a gig or whatever. But eventually, yeah. You just never get as good as you could be without having guidance or a method, or the coach being some holder of that method and the things that would be most beneficial. So they're looking from a perspective and seeing you, in the water, and knowing what needs to go, what else needs to go.
And you touched on something really important there, that another crucial aspect of deliberate practice is you're actually trying to acquire skills and knowledge. And by knowledge, I don't mean like linguistic definitions. I mean, it could be anything, content, like more tonal patterns, more whatever. You actually, in deliberate practice, people are doing things that stretch their abilities, that take them away from what they can do. So they're not necessarily just replaying things that they can already do. They're actually engaging in some kind of training that expands their knowledge. So I think that's an important thing to think about, because when we hear things like, everyone rags on Malcolm Gladwell, but he did say the way he described the 10,000. Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule came from his reading of Ericsson's research, and the only bone everyone has to pick is 10,000 hours will generally turn you into an expert. In music, it doesn't. It's more like 25,000 hours if you want to be a world class soloist. But anyways, 10,000 hours is about 4 hours of practice a day for 10 years. And Gladwell put this forward as, he was trying to say, like, look, it basically takes work. If you want to do this, it takes effort, it takes work, which I'm a big fan of. I think that's a good message to send people. Sending people the message like it's going to be puppies and rainbows for 10 years. I don't think that's a good idea to send people who are really serious about training this stuff. But the thing Gladwell just left out of his book, which I'm sure he's well aware of now because everyone's been ragging on him since Outliers came out, is that it's 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. It's not 10,000 hours of just sitting playing things you can already do. It's 10,000 hours of pushing yourself incrementally, which doesn't mean it's inherently miserable. It just means you actually have to be learning stuff in your practice sessions.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes a long ass time. Well, I mean, because I don't have a coach to come into my room and talk to me about harmonic learning sequence. I'm pushing this stuff on the kids, and I'm trying to get feedback and keep finding a better way to when I say pushing it on them, everybody understands I don't push anything. I'm offering hors d'oeuvres and then meat and then salad and then whatever else they eat, so that they have a good balanced diet of the things that I think are important, and for them to grow up musically, not only to achieve in my class, but to have the wherewithal to have distinctions for how they listen for the rest of their lives, kind of thing, and move their bodies. Like at least a third of my class is all about moving to 3 or 4 or 5 different styles of music or meters or whatever. This is the dinosaur song, and getting the nuances between a baby dinosaur and a daddy dinosaur, still with weight, but now, and then what's a rhinoceros? Where does that fit? And then, lion. And then you get down to butterfly, and it's like, I want to see these kids represent their bodies in space and weight, and then flow, of course, but I'm always incorporating flow. Flow is always there. Well, so is everything, except maybe beat isn't necessarily always there, but but there's still time. but there's certain pieces that I use that do that. You know, so it boils down to me. It's like I would love more movement people to come in and look at me and say, yeah, you're not even using your body this way. It's like I'm trying to show the kids, but but I've been spending all my time with this harmonic learning sequence and other things now that I start to incorporate direct instruction this year and failing miserably relative because direct instruction is now conscious in my mind, and now I have different goals or different just different goals set up for what I think my kids will be able to do if I taught them properly. So it's like so I've got that in balance with what we're talking about here. It's like but I don't have a coach to come in and watch me teach harmonic learning sequence and say, oh yeah, I've done this before. I've got a method. Here's what you should be doing, Eric. It's like I'm kind of the source of getting that, and I steal from other people's ideas on this. But when it comes to teaching the little ones, I'm driving not blind, but I am investigating a new territory.
Yeah, so that's technically purposeful practice. Like if you're talking about practicing becoming a better teacher and trying to implement more of Engelman and Carnine's direct instruction ideas, that's purposeful practice. And to get to the point of purposeful practice where you can even do that, you have to have pretty robust mental representations in your field, or you can't even make intelligent guesses what experiments to run. Like someone who knew DI well but had never taught an instrument, they would probably be able to run experiments and figure it out from the ground up better than someone with no musical experience. But having musical experience yourself and ability to teach some music at some level is going to make your purposeful practice a lot more calculated than someone else.
So there's a lot of gray in between, but this structure is something that would be good to consider. To self-reflect.
There's a lady, I'm forgetting her name, and I really apologize for everyone. Hopefully, I'll find it at some point. But she has a book about it's in the business world, and it's something about making your customers have success with your products, whether you're coding digital products or making products, and that's the thing that's going to make your product sell and stick around in the market. And she uses this framework of deliberate practice very like out of left field in her book, as she clearly is well read in this area. But she talks about how she makes all these distinctions we make about deliberate practice, but she brings it to a level that's even more applicable in the classroom. How do you know if something is the right level of difficulty for you to take on? And I think there's a lot of parallels with instrumental practice here. But if you can't learn something in 2 to 3 sessions that are 45 to 90 minutes long, you have bitten off more than you can chew. It's too difficult. Now, the one caveat I will say here is that listening exposure to music, learning to audiate, and be acculturated to music, you can't acculturate someone with 3 90-minute sessions. So we have to throw that out the window. But when I mean like you're trying to learn how to play a piece on the guitar and you're trying to achieve some kind of goal, if you can't do that in 3 45-minute sessions, I would just throw the 90-minute session out the window. You probably are doing something that's too difficult. Right. And so the thing I want to inoculate people against and vaccinate them against is deliberate practice doesn't mean you're pushing yourself so hard you're kind of losing your mind. We're talking about incremental increases in skill, and this has to be done manageably. You have to go from where you are to the next step. And this totally lines up with DI and everything Engelman did. I mean, Engelman was just like, if you're on step 1, I should be able to take you to step 2 in this lesson. It shouldn't take like 15 lessons to get you to the next step. And then again, there's big caveats here with learning to audiate because it doesn't totally line up with all of this. Some people just need to listen to music for a year before the tonal patterns and stuff even come online.
And sing with it. Perform with it too. Active listening or
or moving,
Focus,
some people can copy patterns, but they won't learn the movement thing for like a year of having someone force them to kind of dance and shift their weight and flow around. And I totally acknowledge that. So there are domain specific caveats here, but in general, you gotta bite things off into workable units.
Yeah, I was on a this is what comes up for me when you talk about this. I was on a piano pedagogy page. It's like all these thousands and thousands of experts all over the world talking about piano pedagogy, and there's some crossover with some MLT folks in that group, and there's 20 or 30 comments on how do we get this rhythm. My student's having trouble with this rhythm, and not one person said, get away from the instrument and move. Mm-hmm. Not one person out of all those, all these different counting ideas, all these different, tricks and lollipop this and, all these kinds of things that are techniques that can work and be beneficial, but they're inconsistent and they're not logical. There's just what worked for them when they were little or whatever. And not one, it breaks my heart to say, people teaching rhythm and not one of the ideas out of all these great piano. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they have great piano students, and I'm sure they're great pianists, a lot of them, but that they don't come up and say, move.
Oh, for sure. This is one of the craziest things about MLT in general. Like I've been getting some of my students are doing the Royal Conservatory piano exams and all that kind of stuff. And sometimes, I just say, what pieces do you want to learn from this book for your exam? And we can learn these. But I know where they are on their rhythm learning sequence. I know what content they've mastered. I know if they know, subdivisions in triple or elongations in triple or whatever. Yep. And I can immediately tell if there's a rhythm in the piece that they're learning that's going to cause them problems. That does not mean I will avoid it. I'm just saying if I want them to learn it quickly and they haven't mastered a certain rhythm that's in a piece, I have no delusion that it's just going to magically happen, outside of the actual LSAs or activities that I do.
So do they go home and then now they have a purposeful practice? Whereas with you, if they're practicing in front of you, do you, show me how you practice, and then you can coach them in a session that they're practicing versus your typical teaching scenario where you go over and talk, but teaching them how to, I think I poked at this a little earlier.
Yeah, you touched on this earlier. The difference between getting a student to practice well is one thing that you have to do, and you're doing that in the lesson, hopefully, and hopefully giving them some idea of what they can do on their own. But there's a point where the student starts needing to learn the mechanics of practice itself. They need to learn about spacing and interleaving and singing tonal patterns and singing the resting tone. And I make a big point out of my lessons to do that. But there's a time and a place for that, I don't think it's... if you think about minute per minute, if you have a half an hour with a student, I'm always thinking what's the most benefit that they'll get from this? Yeah. And when they're a beginner, it's not coaching them on crazy practice techniques. 1 week in, interleave, spacing, it doesn't matter. They're going to be getting so many newbie gains that you're better off just getting them to sing and move and play the instrument. But there comes a point, and it's different for every student, a couple months in, a year in, where they're already showing up for 20-minute practice sessions every day, which is a huge obstacle for a lot of people to begin with. And they're already doing things. Now you start thinking, well, okay, they have a practice habit. How can I get them to get more out of the practice habit? And you start, and for me, it's audiation is number one.
Yeah. And then
because that's what we're trying to do is create musicians, right?
Yeah. And for those who might have missed the Molly Gebrian episode, this would be a great episode to go back to. These are, I think so much of our episodes should be interleaved.
Yes.
They cross-reference each other all the time, or maybe we don't have anything else.
So learning to practice is a huge skill that you have to pick up on itself. And one thing I want to say here, because there's going to be people are going to be having this thought pop in their mind. They're going to be like, well, this person was like a famous musician and they don't have any effective practice strategies, or they don't talk about spacing and interleaving and singing total patterns and all that stuff. But what you're really talking about in that circumstance is a massive survival bias. If we play Russian roulette with kids learning piano at a music school, some kids just happen to naturally sing things at home without being coached into it. Some kids move their body while they listen to music. So there is real survivor bias happens.
And there's also the 99.999 percentile musicians that are out there that basically can teach themselves.
Yeah. Some people are more autodidactic in the sense that they can self-regulate and do that kind of stuff. But some people I don't think are consciously doing it. They're just accidentally doing all the right things, which is hilarious.
Or doing the things they like to do and not the things they need to do.
That was me in high school. It's funny. In high school, I naturally didn't take lessons. I would try a lesson with people once in a while, but I just could, like, at some level, I didn't know what audiation was, but I could tell this person was not helping me audiate, and I just naturally disengaged. And my main high school music teacher, who I took lessons with in guitar class and stuff, he was very audiation supportive and and all that, and that's why I kind of just I stuck with. But I had jazz teachers, for example, who would they'd say, okay, you got to play this scale over this chord when you're improvising, and that was like the extent of the lesson. But I was like, how do I make it sound good like when you do? And I knew there was a gap in those two.
Yeah. I studied with a guy who turned down Glenn Miller and all these, big bands back in the 40s, 50s. And he was a studio trombonist in New York City for such a long while, and then he basically retired, and I took lessons from him for 20 years. He was old.
Mm-hmm.
But he would do crossword puzzles in the corner of the room, or like all these sequence finds. And if you blew a note or you did something he didn't like, he would stop and just sing the last phrase of where you left off, where he wanted you to start, and he would get aggravated, no, then he would sing the thing, and he would tell you the bar number out of his mind, out of his memory. Mm-hmm. I just Bill Grandy, God rest his soul, but I got so much from his manner. I don't know what it was, but we had a good relationship, and he pushed me quite a bit, and I was already among the better trumpet players, and then this just put me over the top in terms of my small pond that I was in.
Mm-hmm.
But God knows what would have happened if I had been taught to audiate by him. He already could audiate. I was trying to learn to audiate, or I was doing it under the hood somewhat, but at any rate, these relationships with your teachers and having them give you the path forward beyond, and knowing what to give you that'll push you to the next level in technique or musicianship or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go home, and then you have a picture of him in your mind. At least I did when I was practicing. So that kind of what would he be doing right now?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like what I overlaid on my practice, at least in high school times. And that got me by for a long time, even all the way through college. I don't know that I learned anything else other than I got incrementally better every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then I tried to play jazz and couldn't swing. I remember the jazz lead trumpet player came over to me, and you said, he says, you swing like a lead toilet seat.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm like, what? And I had just started listening to jazz, so anyway.
That's the feedback portion of deliberate practice. So, basically deliberate practice, like we said, it consists of someone putting you through a training regimen that they know is going to work, but also it's the feedback component. And so you can do this on your own. You can say, well, okay, I'm playing alone in my room and this doesn't sound as good as I want it to, but I mean, one, you need a model of how you want it to sound, but two, the instructor they have mindfulness of where you are that you often can't access. And so when they say, no, what you're doing now doesn't cut it, you're getting this feedback that says, well, whatever I just did was not working. And you immediately start trying different things. And this can push people to practice in ways and to experiment with ways of performing and practicing and all that they wouldn't do on their own. They just wouldn't get pushed into this. And a great example of this is like, I remember when I was doing some lessons with a jazz piano teacher, and I was playing guitar. He's teaching me to audiate properly, essentially. And I would solo, and he would say like, no, don't play what you just played. You're not actually, he would just say, you're not hearing it in your head before you play it. I don't accept it. Mm-hmm. And it was amazing. He could literally tell if I was audiating licks, like before I played them. And so what this did is it forced me to only play things that were simple, but were honestly audiated. And you're not doing that in a way where you're not exploring sounds and you're not using creativity, mm-hmm. but he just had a really high bar that I had to cross. And what was weird is like, it wasn't about how complicated the licks were.
Yep.
If I just went, it was accepted. Yep. But he would just immediately banish things that were nonsense. Like if I was noodling with scales or just like trying to play like arpeggios that I wasn't honestly audiating in context, I was just like theoretically approaching them. Just like, no, that's not good enough. And it really forces you to change the way you're approaching something.
Yeah.
So the feedback is such a massive component of deliberate practice. And I think if you translate this into teaching, oh my goodness, we're not getting enough feedback when we teach. We're not having people listen to our lessons. I think as long as you have permission from your students, once in a while you should record your lessons and listen to them and try to think, like, really the name of the game is, how do I get better? Like, listen to your lesson and say like, whoa, I was pushing too hard and they were not getting it.
It's the most painful thing you can do is listen to your lessons, because you think sometimes you think it's gone really well and you go back and you just listen. It's like horrible. It's hard to do, but boy, oh boy, is it valuable, because it'll change you on a dime.
Totally. And, even listening to my own podcast, a couple of my friends said like, hey, you've gotten better at like having conversations since you started a podcast. And why? Because, man, when I go back and listen to how much I was interrupting Eric, which I still do, let's be honest, guys. Yeah. But I mean, it was really bad in the first, 20 episodes. And it was painful to listen to.
I've cut down on my knows, I think. I don't know, because they're unconscious to me,
But that's part of the learning process. And, to kind of land this plane and wrap this up a bit, I think what's inspiring about the way Ericsson talks about this is he's very optimistic in terms of we create barriers for performance. We think there are limits to like what we can do in a sense. And if you look at all these, these different athletes and musicians and stuff like that, the culture always sets limits, like, well, no one can run faster than this and no one can do this. And what causes the change? It's someone invents a new training philosophy and they execute it and it raises the whole field to a new bar. And then the only way everyone else is going to keep up with them is if they adopt those training methods. So, I mean, the reason I get inspired by this is like, if you want to get better, look at how you're practicing. And you may not have a coach or a teacher, but say, okay, well, I practiced like this. I did 10 repetitions and I interleaved it. Is that good enough? Is that good for where I want to go? Can I boost this somehow? And it brings some life back into, what's possible. Because it's pretty much all lies in training. And yeah, you might need to learn to do some of this when you're 4 if you want to, be a world-class composer or whatever. But that honestly just doesn't matter. You have what you have, and moving forward, a lot of what you're going to get out of practicing music is how you're actually approaching practice. So you need to make a study out of practice itself, like you were saying, Eric.
Yep. Make a study out of practice. Record yourself. Be deliberate, right? And then if you don't have coaching, be purposeful about what you're doing. Have a goal in mind, a specific target for what you're accomplishing. And then, sometimes you just got to play around and explore. So there's nothing wrong with that. It just will lose its benefit uh, in the long run.
Yeah, and
So,
I think this exploration thing could be a podcast on its own, because it sounds like we're saying everything has to be like very machine-like and automated and super efficient to be able to get results. It's not really like that. Sometimes you have to experiment because you don't know how to solve a problem. But generally, I mean, you need some kind of goal and you need some kind of hypothesis for how you can reach that goal. I want to audiate these chord progressions. I'm going to do this practice technique. And then you monitor how that's going. You say, well, it's working, so I'm going to keep doing it, or it's not working. And if it's not working, what do you do? Well, I can try to get feedback from someone who's more skilled at this than I am, or I can try to change the philosophy. And so this is what I use a practice journal for. I don't write long journal entries of like everything I'm doing. Once a week, I'll say, okay, these are the general things I'm focusing on. These are the methods I'm going to use to get there. And then you have to reflect on if that's working or not. If it's not working, I mean, all that you got was data from the universe that doesn't work. So that's fine. It's just you have to change something now. That's about how complicated it is. I mean, Engelman just did that a lot, and he became, one of the most skilled teachers, I would say, of all time from doing that. So purposeful practice definitely has a place.
Yep, for sure. Absolutely. All right, that's a good one.
It's a fun topic. Recommended books: Peak by Anders Ericsson. If you want a public-facing book that, serves this up on a platter, that's what I would. He has some more intense academic articles, but I would start with Peak first. Even if you're going to get into the more hardcore academic stuff, Peak will prime you for that too.
Yeah, I read the book that came before that. There's a couple, but we'll link something in the show notes.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Bo.
Thanks, Eric.